My name is Margaret and Whitman, and for 73 years, I believed I understood the rhythm of life. I thought I knew what growing old with grace meant, that it would smell like morning coffee in a house built with love, and sound like the creak of a familiar porch swing in the golden light of a Charleston sunset. I was wrong. It began with something so small, laughably small, that I almost didn't notice the earthquake it triggered. A rug. That's all. One worn corner curled up. A soft betrayal under my slippers. I stumbled, bumped my elbow on the sideboard, and sent a bowl of strawberries crashing to the tile. I laughed it off, mostly embarrassed. My pride was bruised more than anything else. I never imagined that would be used as evidence against me. The next morning, before I'd even had my second cup of coffee, my son Daniel showed up. No warning, no "Hi Mom," just checking in. Just the sound of his shiny sedan pulling into the gravel, and then the firm rap of his knuckles on the door I once painted ocean blue. When I opened it, he looked like he'd stepped out of a corporate brochure. Pressed shirt, leather folder, that efficient tone that replaces concern with logistics. There was no hug. No, "How are you feeling?" Only this. "Mom, we found a really great assisted living facility. It's just outside Asheville. They've got full-time staff, great reviews, beautiful grounds. You'll be safer there." I blinked at him, genuinely confused. "You mean for when I'm older?" "No, Mom. For now." Then I saw them. 2 movers behind him, carrying labeled boxes like they'd been instructed to remove me, not help me move. My living room, my sanctuary filled with George's books, the hand-stitched curtains I made during our second year of marriage, had become a staging ground for my quiet eviction. "Daniel Whitman, you have lost your mind," I said, voice cracking but clear. "This is my home. This is where I live." He avoided my eyes. He always does that when he knows he's wrong. "You fell, Mom. The doctor says next time it could be worse. I can't keep dropping everything every time you get a bump or bruise. I've got deadlines, investors, back-to-back meetings." There it was. The real reason. My son had become a businessman who couldn't afford his mother being human. The rest happened in slow motion. I watched my life get packed into cardboard. I stood in the hallway and heard Daniel telling the movers to be careful with the photographs. As if that excused erasing someone's world. The ride in the facility van was silent. I didn't cry. Not yet. I looked out at the passing trees, trying to memorize every bend of the road, every pecan grove, every weather-beaten barn. Afraid that forgetting them would mean losing the last fragments of my life with George. We arrived at a building that looked more like a tech startup than a home. Sleek glass walls, manicured lawns, zero soul. Inside, the air smelled of bleach and synthetic lavender. A nurse handed me a keycard and said, "Welcome, Ms. Whitman." There it was. The final insult. Ms., not Mrs. Not ma'am. Not Margaret. Just a barcode and a room number. Daniel didn't stay long. He set down 3 framed photos like offerings and checked something off a list. One photo was of him at his college graduation. The second was of George holding baby Daniel in a rocking chair, my favorite picture. The third was a cropped family portrait where my own shoulders had been cut off, like I was halfway erased already. "I'll swing by this weekend," he said. He didn't even hug me goodbye. The door closed. I sat on the edge of a narrow bed covered in polyester floral print, clutching the corner of a pillow that didn't smell like home. The lights buzzed overhead. And that's when it hit me. I had been placed here like an object too fragile to keep around but too inconvenient to throw away. Still, I didn't cry. I didn't cry when I looked out the window and saw a woman in her 80s sitting alone by a koi pond, feeding stale crackers to fish that didn't exist. I didn't cry when I opened the drawer and found a laminated schedule. Bingo on Tuesdays, movie night on Fridays, chicken casserole every Sunday like clockwork. But that night, after the lights dimmed and the hallway fell quiet, I lay awake in the sterile dark and listened to the tick of my wristwatch. Tick, tick, tick. A sound I had always associated with life's steady pace now felt like a countdown. I thought of George, of his quiet strength, the way he used to stir honey into coffee and whistle when he didn't realize I was watching. I thought of our garden, the way magnolia blossoms used to fall like little blessings across the porch. And then I thought of Daniel, my son, the baby I nursed through colic, who brought frogs into the house and painted Mother's Day cards in crayon. That little boy was now a man who handed me a clipboard and told me to sign my independence away. That's when I felt it. Not sorrow. Not helplessness. Something sharper. A flicker. Not a fire. Not yet. But the spark. A whisper inside that said no. Not like this. If my life was going to fade, it would not be under fluorescent lights in a room with wheels on the furniture. If I had any say left in this world, and I did, I would fight for my last chapters to be written in ink, not printed from someone else's agenda. This was not the end. It was the setup. The next move would be mine. The second morning in the facility began not with the scent of home, but with the hiss of automatic air freshener, spitting synthetic lavender into the hallway like a reminder. Comfort here comes on a timer. I cracked open the curtain in my room. No garden. Just identical shrubs trimmed into unnatural cubes. Beyond that, a parking lot with orderly lines, but no soul. I used to believe that plants should grow wild, that flowers lean toward sunlight the way we lean into memory. Here, even the trees looked bored. Breakfast was served in the communal dining space. Translation, a room that tried hard to look cheerful but felt more like a cafeteria for ghosts. The wallpaper was beige. The ceiling tiles blinked with tiny LED lights. The tables were set in perfect symmetry, like a grid meant to suppress any hint of rebellion. I shuffled in, past women who wore pastel cardigans and the same expression, resignation. Men hunched over oatmeal, their eyes glazed, some staring into space as if searching for a memory they'd lost decades ago. I sat alone. My tray held scrambled eggs, toast that crunched like drywall, and a plastic cup of apple juice. I missed George's buttermilk pancakes. I missed slicing strawberries in the morning while the radio hummed old jazz. But most of all, I missed having a place at a table where someone saw me, not just fed me. Need help cutting that, Han? A nurse in bubblegum pink scrubs leaned over. I looked at her. She was maybe 25. Kind eyes but tired ones. No, I said softly. But thank you. She walked away with a nod, probably noting on her chart that Ms. Whitman remains independent. Independent. What a cruel word, in a place where you needed a badge just to open your own door. After breakfast, I wandered into the lounge, a room filled with beige chairs facing a television set to maximum volume. A game show was on, some contestant shouting about winning a cruise. No one in the room was watching. One woman dozed, chin on her chest. A man blinked slowly at a puzzle book he never touched. I sat by the window because that's what you do here. You sit. You wait. You learn to let go, one memory at a time. Outside, a ginger cat sniffed around the flower bed. Thin, alert, alive. I envied that cat. It could leap the fence. It didn't need permission to leave. Excuse me, came a soft voice. Are you Ms. Whitman? I turned. A young woman in powder blue scrubs stood nearby. Not the pink nurse from earlier. This one had short curly hair and a clipboard tucked under her arm. Her name badge read, Emily Carter, RN. Yes, I replied. Margaret Ann Whitman. Room 213. Age 73. Fall risk. Favorite color, probably still yellow. I meant it as sarcasm. She smiled anyway. I was just going to ask, she said, pulling a chair beside mine. What do you love to do? I blinked. That question landed differently. Not, how are you feeling? Not, do you need your meds? But what do you love? It took me a second. I didn't want to answer with something like reading or crocheting, the usual answers they expect. So I told the truth. Chess, I said. And I bake a damn good strudel. Cinnamon, cardamom, the real stuff. None of that store-bought nonsense. Emily laughed. Not the polite kind. The real kind, head tilted back, eyes bright. Well, that's the best answer I've heard all week. We sat for a moment, two women from very different worlds, joined by a single unguarded moment. I'll bring a board tomorrow, she said. You bring the recipe. Then she stood, tucked her clipboard under her arm, and left. Just like that. But something shifted. Not in the room, in me. Because for the first time since being dragged out of my home, someone asked what I loved, not what I needed. And in that moment I realized I wasn't dead yet. That night I didn't sleep well, but not from despair. From anticipation. I rearranged the furniture in my mind. I walked the halls of the house George built. I smelled the beeswax polish on the banister, the sharp bite of coffee percolating in the old steel pot. I remembered our final game of chess before he passed. He beat me, of course. But only barely. He winked and said, "You were playing the long game, weren't you?" And now maybe I was. When Emily returned the next day, she carried a beautiful wooden chessboard, its squares polished to a warm gleam. It smelled faintly of varnish and old strategy. She set it down on a table by the window. Speed game, she asked, placing a pawn on e4. Speed is for children, I said, mirroring the move. Let's play the long game. Let every decision echo. And we did. Each piece moved with purpose. Each question carried weight. I told her about the magnolia tree in our front yard that bloomed like clockwork every May. About the way George used to label jars of jam with bad puns. Peach, please was his masterpiece. She told me her mother had once been a piano teacher before Parkinson slowly quieted the music. I guess you know how to wait, I said, castling. Had to learn, she replied, I's not leaving the board. When she won that first game, and she did, I handed her something unexpected, a small floral notebook. Its pages still smelled like the drawer I'd hidden it in. On the first page, in cursive faded by time, I had written, Emily, I trust you more than blood. She opened her mouth to speak. I raised a hand. Don't ask. The time will come. That night, I slept with the window cracked open, letting in the scent of distant pine and the sound of crickets. Life had not returned to normal. But maybe, just maybe, it had returned to possible. By the end of my first week in the glass cage, I'd established a quiet ritual. Wake up at dawn, breathe through the hum of sterile air, and sit by the lounge window with a cup of bitter facility coffee. Not exactly Charleston roast, but it gave my hands something to hold. I had started to make peace with the place, or more truthfully, I had started plotting how to outweed it. Emily and I played chess most mornings when she could steal time between rounds. I'd hide riddles in drawers or tape cryptic notes to the underside of chairs. Our small rebellion felt like something sacred. We were secret agents in a world that wanted us sedated. We even had code. Queen to D8 meant the administrator was coming. Bishop under threat meant a doctor visit I didn't ask for. Every chess move became a message, every game a survival drill. Then the phone call came. I was in the sunroom, reading Emily Dickinson aloud to a half-asleep potted fern when the front desk paged me. Ms. Whitman? Your son Daniel is on line 1. I held the receiver like it might burn me. Hi, Mom, he said, cheerful, like nothing had happened. Sorry I haven't been by. Work's been nuts. Listen, there's this incredible offer on the house. A real estate developer reached out. They want to buy up the whole street for some luxury condos. Silence on my end. I mean, we're talking 7 figures here. You'd never have to worry about bills again. What do you think? I let the pause stretch. Finally, I said, imagine, son, that I'm still breathing. He laughed nervously. Come on, Mom. I just meant you be secure. I was secure, I replied. Back when my home still had a front porch and you weren't trying to liquidate my memories. Mom, he said again, but there was ice now. It's not just about you. It's a smart financial move. And you're such a smart boy, I said, calm and cold. But you've forgotten the one lesson your father valued most. People are not ledgers. They are not assets to be moved or sold. Then I hung up. Not slammed. Not yelled. Just ended. That night, I couldn't sleep. I wandered barefoot down the corridor, the floor humming beneath me like a railcar in motion. I passed shut doors, silent televisions, dimmed lives. At the far end of the hallway sat a forgotten courtyard, a cement rectangle with one neglected planter and a bench that hadn't felt a human sigh in years. I stood there for a long time, letting the silence settle in. Then I had an idea. The next morning, I asked the administrator if I could plant something in the old cement box. Knock yourself out, she shrugged, barely looking up. I did. Emily snuck in seedlings from her own garden, basil, cilantro, thyme, and, almost as a joke, a single petunia. We got up before rounds, worked the dry soil with plastic spoons and old forks. I felt the ache in my back like a badge of honor. My fingers were dirt-streaked. My soul clean. Why are we doing this? She asked, brushing earth from her knees. Because as long as something grows, I told her, so do I. Gardening, like chess, is a long game. You plan 6 moves ahead, knowing time always wins, but you make each move count. The next day, Daniel called again. I let it ring. But by Friday, something worse happened. The facility received a fax from Daniel's lawyer, a petition to evaluate me for guardianship. Emotional instability. Decline in reasoning. Fall history. Alleged memory gaps. He wanted control. Official. Legal. Permanent. Emily found the form before they filed it and rushed to me. He's trying to claim you're no longer capable, she said, breathless. My hands trembled. But not from fear. Then let's show them what capable looks like. That afternoon, we called Benjamin Harper, our family's attorney for over 2 decades. He remembered George. He remembered the house. And most importantly, he remembered me. I want to name someone as my power of attorney, I said. Effective immediately. You understand what that means? He asked. I do. I also know that blood doesn't equal trust. He hesitated. And you're choosing? Emily Carter, registered nurse. The only person who's treated me like a human being in weeks. He didn't argue. He didn't need to. We filed the paperwork. Harper faxed the notarized document straight to the facility and Daniel's legal team. That night, I sat in my room, holding George's old pen, the one he'd used to sign our mortgage, our wills, even our marriage license. I remembered his voice. If trouble comes, trust the one who won't betray. I had. And for the first time in weeks I slept. Not out of exhaustion. Out of readiness. Because the next phase of the game had begun and I was done playing defense. I never imagined my rebellion would begin with a petunia. But there it was, a single stubborn bloom pushing through dry soil in a cracked concrete planter behind a retirement facility that smelled like antiseptic and forgotten birthdays. We planted it at dawn, Emily and I, using plastic spoons as shovels and smuggling in herbs and flowers like contraband. She'd sneak them in under her jacket. Basil, thyme, cilantro, and one small petunia, half-wilted but unafraid. It wasn't just gardening. It was proof that we were still alive, still growing, still playing the long game. By then, Daniel's guardianship petition was circling like a hawk. He claimed I was mentally compromised, that my recent behaviors were erratic, that I needed legal protection from my own choices. In other words, I was an obstacle. But I had already placed Emily at my side legally, strategically. She was my healthcare proxy, my power of attorney, and whether Daniel liked it or not, my chosen family. She stood beside me not out of duty but belief. You know he'll come back swinging, Emily said one evening as we watered the herbs. Let him, I replied, tugging a weed from the soil. Some pawns think they're kings until they meet the queen. And then something unexpected happened. Olivia, the night nurse, knocked on my door after midnight, her face pale. I need to tell you something, she whispered. Your son asked me to delete the phone logs from your room. He didn't want a record of how often or how rarely he's called. I couldn't do it. She held up her phone. I copied everything. Another pawn switching sides. The board was shifting. The next morning, Daniel returned. He didn't bring flowers. He brought a psychiatrist. Just a second opinion, he said, smoothing his suit like a man about to close a deal. But Harper was already there, waiting with documents, a court order blocking any medical evaluations without my written consent. Daniel turned pale. I'm just trying to help my mother, he snapped. Then stop trying to erase her, I said. His face tightened. The mask cracked. Emily and I returned to the garden that night. The petunia was blooming magenta, bold, unapologetic. How does it survive here? She asked softly. Because no one told it not to, I smiled. Like us. We wrote letters to George. Not for answers. For clarity. For courage. I tucked one under the planter, sealed with a ribbon from the box the movers had almost thrown away. Inside the letter, George, your boy forgot how to play the long game. But don't worry, I haven't. 2 days later, the facility scheduled a wellness review. Dr. Levin, who'd always walked the line between medical ethics and convenience, appeared with a new psychiatrist and a clipboard full of biases. Margaret, the new doctor, said gently, can you name 5 words that start with the letter S? I leaned forward, calm as glass. Sure. Subpoena. Solstice. Sassafras. Symphony. Stalemate. The pen froze on the page. Report. Patient demonstrates advanced language skills and intact cognition. No evidence of decline. Check. Later that night, Emily returned from a visit to Liberty Bank. I opened the box, she said quietly. It held 3 things, a flash drive, an old ledger, and a homeowner's policy rewritten a month before George died. Let me guess, I said. Daniel's the sole beneficiary. She nodded. And the drive? Security camera footage from George's office the night he passed. Blurry, but the frame caught a silhouette. A man. Entering after midnight. The stride was familiar. Daniel. We said nothing at first. Just sat in silence while a thunderstorm rolled across the hills like an old drumline. I reached under the table, pulled out George's pen once more, and began rewriting my will. Emily Carter Whitman, I wrote. And her daughter Mia. I paused. And the house, my house, to be held by the Garden of Memory Foundation. No condos. No developers. Just magnolias. It wasn't revenge. It was restoration. Checkmate was coming. But not yet. First, we'd let Daniel play his final move. And then we'd end the game. A few days after the ledger and footage surfaced, I knew we were approaching the endgame. But in chess, as in life, the final moves require not brute force, but precision. I sat by the window that morning, the petunia in full bloom beside me. The garden had begun to look less like a forgotten planter and more like a statement. A place reclaimed. A flag planted. Daniel hadn't called in days. That was unlike him. Silence meant planning. A wounded ego retreats not to lick its wounds, but to sharpen its knife. Ready? Emily asked, stepping into the room. She held a manila envelope in one hand, her face serious. I nodded. Inside the envelope were copies of everything. The flash drive with the office footage. The rewritten insurance policy. The ledger showing suspicious financial transfers. A printed transcript of Daniel's phone call with the facility's medical director, coercing a diagnosis of incompetence. And the report from my cognitive test. Clean. Undeniable. We uploaded the files to cloud storage under our code, G7, G8, Q. A pawn becomes a queen. I pressed send on 3 emails. Harper, my lawyer. Investigative journalist number 1 in Charleston. Investigative journalist number 2 in Asheville. Emily placed a hand on my shoulder. You sure? Let the world know, I said. Let him know he underestimated the wrong woman. That night, just after 2 a.m., my door creaked open. Olivia slipped in, her eyes wide. I have something else, she whispered. Daniel texted me again. Offered me $1,000 to delete your call history from the nurse station server. I couldn't do it. I backed up everything. It's on this. She handed me a USB stick the size of a paperclip. Another pawn, another piece moved. In the morning, Daniel arrived. This time he wasn't smiling. He brought 2 lawyers. And a psychiatrist. Second opinion, he repeated, like a chant. But Harper was already waiting in the lounge, sipping black tea from a thermos. Calm. Ready. He stepped forward, court order in hand. Any further medical evaluation requires written consent and legal counsel present. That includes today. Daniel's jaw clenched. He turned to me. Why are you doing this? I looked at him, really looked at him. And for a moment, I saw my son again. The boy who once cried when his bike broke. Who asked for one more bedtime story. Then I remembered George's face the day we buried him. The house. The missing money. The betrayal. You made your move, I said. Now live with it. He stormed out. No words. Just the faint scent of cologne and panic. 2 hours later, Harper called. We filed the motion to reopen George's death, he said. Your son's inheritance and his conduct are now under legal review. Law enforcement is involved. I didn't cry. I closed my eyes and listened to the basil rustling in the courtyard wind. Something about the sound reminded me of spring. That evening, we sat in what we now called the war room, my tiny dormitory with the windows always cracked, the board always set. Emily, Olivia, Harper, my team. We reviewed final documents, scheduled interviews, prepared statements. And then Harper looked at me. One more thing, he said. The adoption paperwork. Family court judge signed off last night. Emily is now your legal daughter. Emily froze. I turned to her and smiled. You earned it, I said. You reminded me I'm more than my age. You saw me as more than paperwork. You brought me back to life. She blinked fast but didn't cry. We didn't cry in the war room. At 9 p.m., I signed the updated will. Every asset to Emily Carter Whitman and her daughter Mia. The house to the Garden of Memory Foundation. The trees protected. The story preserved. In the corner of the garden, the petunia now had 4 blossoms. One for me. One for George. One for Emily. One for what comes next. Because queens don't wait for permission. They move. The morning of the hearing, rain fell like confession. Not dramatic, not thunderous, just steady, quiet, like the sky couldn't hold the truth any longer. We rode in Harper's car. Emily sat beside me, her hands clasped in her lap. I held my travel mug filled with black tea and a pinch of hibiscus. George's favorite. For luck, I whispered. Harper parked outside the courthouse, where people with umbrellas drifted like ghosts. The building smelled of damp coats, floor polish, and quiet tension. We passed through security. Emily steadied my arm, not as a nurse, not even as a daughter, but as someone who'd chosen to stand beside me when family walked away. Inside the courtroom, Daniel was already seated. 3 lawyers flanked him like armor. He wore a sleek suit, expensive cologne, and a smirk that cracked the second he saw me. I met his eyes and did not blink. The probate judge entered. older, sharp-eyed, and clearly tired of courtroom theater. This hearing will address the contested will of George Whitman, he announced, as well as the petition filed to reopen his death as a potentially suspicious event. There it was. Spoken aloud. Suspicious. For years, that word had lived only in the corners of my heart. Now it sat in the air like thunderclouds. Harper rose first. Your Honor, he said, voice calm but heavy. We have submitted forensic video evidence showing Mr. Daniel Whitman entering his father's office the night he died. We also present a rewritten insurance policy, altered 1 month before Mr. George Whitman's passing, naming Daniel as sole beneficiary, and a ledger detailing questionable financial transfers tied to Daniel's accounts. The judge flipped through the papers, eyes narrowing. Do you have a psychiatric evaluation of the petitioner? Yes, Harper said, handing over the clean report. Full cognitive clarity. No signs of impairment. The patient, Margaret Whitman, also passed a linguistic and memory stress test with results placing her in the top percentile for her age group. Daniel's lawyer stood. Objection. Miss Carter, he gestured toward Emily, has been given power of attorney and adopted in a suspiciously convenient time frame. We request her testimony be disregarded due to conflict of interest. Harper didn't even flinch. In that case, he said, pressing a button on his tablet, we'd like to play an audio recording from the facility. The courtroom speakers crackled to life. And then Daniel's voice filled the room. Cold. Calculating. I don't care what she remembers. Just give me the report that says she's incompetent. I'll make sure your clinic gets the new exam tables. And something extra for you. The room fell silent. The judge looked up, one brow arched. Is that your voice, Mr. Whitman? Daniel's lawyer shifted. Daniel tried to speak. Failed. Spoke again. I was trying to help. She's not well, that's enough, the judge said. I've heard what I need to. Verdict, will upheld. Guardianship denied. Attempted coercion of medical staff, referred for criminal investigation. Daniel Whitman remanded into custody pending further inquiry. The sound of metal cuffs closing around his wrists echoed like a final move. Checkmate. As the bailiff led him away, Daniel looked at me, mouth open, eyes wide, as if still trying to understand how the game had ended like this. He had forgotten one truth. Pawns may rush, but queens wait. And then they strike. During recess, Harper brought me the final draft of my will. I signed it right there, the hibiscus tea still warm in my hand. To Emily Carter Whitman and her daughter Mia, I leave everything I own, including the house on Magnolia Lane. That land shall never be sold. It will belong to the Garden of Memory Foundation. The magnolias must remain. The judge added a note to the file. Request for public garden status approved. It was done. The fight was over. And for the first time in a long time, I was not afraid. Not of age. Not of death. Not of being forgotten. Because I hadn't just survived. I had reshaped the endgame. And queens, true queens, write their own final chapters. A week later, I returned not to the facility but home. My real home. The brick house on Magnolia Lane, built by George's hands, polished by decades of love, and nearly stolen by greed. But not anymore. Emily unlocked the door. Mia ran ahead of us with the enthusiasm only a 6-year-old can summon. Grandma Maggie, do we live here now? She asked, barefoot on the hardwood, her voice echoing through the sunlit rooms. I smiled. Yes, darling. This is where everything begins. The air was thick with memory, honeysuckle, cinnamon, the distant scent of old wood. The kitchen still creaked in the same spot near the stove. The magnolias outside had begun to lean just slightly, as if waiting for someone to notice. We moved slowly through the house that first day. I let the silence speak. Let it wash over the parts of me that had been scrubbed too clean by the sterile brightness of the facility. In the garden, the petunia from the facility had survived the transplant. Emily and I planted it near the base of George's tree, the one that had outlasted storms and developers alike. That evening we made strudel. Real strudel. Not frozen, not reheated. Butter, sugar, love. Mia helped. Her small fingers clumsy, but determined. Grandpa George's recipe? She asked. That's right, I said. And he always said if it's messy, it's probably worth making. At sunset, we sat on the porch. Chessboard between us. Tea steaming. The last gold leaves of fall drifting like blessings from the trees. I still wrote to Daniel. One letter folded and tucked into the ledger where all of this began. Not to gloat. Not to scold. Just this. Son, every player chooses their time control. You chose blitz. I chose classical. Thank you for the lesson, it made me stronger. I hope one day you'll play fair. Spring came early. The house opened to the public on March 1st. The Garden of Memory Foundation held its first open day. Neighbors walked the trails, read the plaques. Each magnolia bore the name of someone who'd helped carry the story: Emily, Olivia, Harper, even Judge Martinez. George's name crowned the oldest tree. We added a bench nearby, a chessboard carved into its surface. Sometimes Mia sits there with her friends and practices the king and rookmate. She tells them, "My grandma was a queen. Not the kind with a crown. The kind who doesn't quit." I write this now from the porch swing with a blanket across my lap and lilac blooming by the steps. The breeze smells like memory and hope. I am older, but I am not gone. Because as long as someone sees the human in you, no nursing home writes your ending. As long as something grows, so do we. As long as the board is set, the game continues. Every life can end in brilliant checkmate, but only if you dare to play it to the very last move.